I'm thankful to Artaxis for facilitating this conversation for National Clay Week this year, and I'm excited to respond to the theme of industry. This has really allowed me a moment to reflect on my most recent trip to China. So it's really hard to imagine beginning a conversation about ceramics and industry without thinking about China. It's where I first beheld the setting of the terracotta soldiers in Xi'an, buried with China's first emperor. It's an example of both an extreme display of wealth and the labor required to produce a literal army of figures. These were manufactured in workshops by anonymous government laborers and local craftspeople using local materials. I've had the great fortune to visit Jingdezhen, porcelain capital of the world, 3 times now. It has produced pottery for the last 1,700 years and has shaped my concept of industry for this conversation. Here on the left, you can see traditional blue cobalt on white porcelain and stacks of bowls precariously resting on a few ceramic firing discs at the rice bowl factory, which is one tiny nook that fit within my camera frame at an enormous space. On the right, rice grain bowls are ready to be unloaded from the kiln. The history of Jingdezhen porcelain is tied to place. The clay is dug and processed locally. Centuries of anonymous skilled workers and craftspeople developed throughout and since the first porcelain objects were made. One of its major resources are the people of Jingdezhen. I'm not aware of another place where you can see a perfect 9-foot porcelain tile rolled out with a pipe and a couple of slats of wood by 3 workers on a rickety table set on a dirt floor and then fired without hint of a crack or warp. It truly is otherworldly. Or paper-thin, eggshell porcelain bowls on which you gaze with breath held at their delicacy for fear the velocity of air may somehow harm their existence. Here you can see traditional rice grain pattern bowls made in molds, pierced with this contraption on the left, which I imagine evolved from a singular steel lancet wielded with expert precision. There's a socio-economic role within industry here. Who are the makers in the grand scheme of industry where the factories are concerned? They're ever present. My first visit to Jingdezhen was only 8 years ago in 2010, and it completely changed the way I thought about ceramics and making. It was the first time I saw expert craftspeople at every stage of the process, rather than one individual taking objects from beginning to end. There's a person who mines and processes the clay, and at every level of production from there. Throwers, fabricators, mold makers, slip casters, cast cleaners, glazers, china painters, kiln masters, and so on. This guy's job is to transport ware, a carryman, in any state, wet, green, bone dry, bisque, finish fired. It's not an unusual sight at all in Jingdezhen. Visiting other places in China like Yixing, home of the Yixing teapot, also known as Zishuware or purple sand clay, has deep ties to its locally mined clay. During the Ming Dynasty, the world's first teapots were created here and still are. Yixing teapots, like the porcelain wares, were important trade commodities. I got a sense here that there were tiers of makers. Factors depended on artist, age, clay, style, and production methods. There was value placed on pots that were shaped by hand using traditional tools by the hands of a specific maker, but also a market for pots that were produced through slip casting by anonymous hands. Individual makers had a role, relationship, and ownership over their work. This was also evident in a visit to Longqian, known for kilns that fired Longqian celadon. There were over 500 kilns discovered there, making it one of the largest historical production centers in China. Beautiful celadons are still being produced here by a range of masters. Though traditional processing of material and firing seem to have been relegated to museum-like venues where historic kiln sites and hammer mills can be seen in action. The image on the left is of the old plate factory in Jingdezhen in 2010. Where many towering stacks of old discarded plates seem to go on forever. They were throwaways from one of the factories that existed here. This is evidence of industry in a factory sense in the hand of the anonymous maker. Objects were produced in great number at lower cost per unit. What comes to bear is the image on the right, which is Taoxishuan today. The compound was built somewhere in the span of the 7 years since I had first visited. it will host a different kind of maker and is conveniently located and accessible to travelers. The Taoxuan Ceramic Art Avenue project utilizes Jingdezhen's heritage in the form of an upscale compound-type community with shops selling high-end goods, including ceramics, housing cafes, and restaurants, as well as an international ceramics residency program and galleries. In essence, this is a transition in industry from factory to tourism. On the right, a storefront workstation proudly reveals clay being 3D printed on numerous machines. And as a reminder, this is on the site of where the old factories once produced numerous objects by anonymous hands. A quick transition to technology's role in industry, or more accurately, technology as industry. In October 2017, at the Jingdezhen Ceramics Fair, I saw things like this: a laser engraver capable of writing or drawing on fired ceramic from a digital file or computer. And this, a CNC cylindrical router for greenware. This had a relationship to the work I'd been doing, making digital files of my sculptures that were then 3D printed in multiples and in various colors and sizes with PLA plastic. One of my most recent installations, titled Rabbit Hole Fractals, aims to question the role of the maker, the value of material, and the significance of objects as they relate to labor and the hand. My most recent trip a few months ago to Lanzhou in north-central China had everything to do with industry in terms of the history of trade and the Silk Road. Through the Dunhuang Creative Center residency program facilitated by Keaton Wynn in partnership with Lanzhou City University, we were asked to make a body of work in response to Dunhuang culture and history. This is the Yellow River, a historically significant trade route, and the Singing Sand Dunes near the edge of the Gobi Desert. The image on the left is the front of the Mogao Caves, also known as the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas, and was a major stop on the ancient Silk Road. On the right is the image of the Yumen Pass, which is where the Silk Road traveled through the Great Wall. This is Shijiqi village, where the sculptor Jin Li is the village head. Jin Li has transformed this small village into an art lab and gallery where some of his sculptures reside. The village has attracted artists and visitors and has great potential for tourism. It's a visceral moment where facets of industry are in the midst of definition against the backdrop of rural China. The agricultural tradition of this village cannot viably sustain their economy in an industrial age. The hand of Jin Li through his sculptural work, and if you look very close at the image, you'll notice the plotting points on this sculpture, one of several artworks being digitally scanned during our visit, with the idea that technology may have a hand in helping to sustain the existence of this community. This is the work I made in Lanzhou during the residency from local brick clay, influenced by the historic sites, the trade routes, and the landscape. The pieces, in essence, are hand copies of each other in repetition, representing the trade and exchanges from east to west, and its ongoing impact on culture and trade through an implication of endless propagation.